Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Dr. Doom found Deku first. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that whipped across the rooftop felt like a thief. It stole the warmth from Izuku Midoriya's thin school uniform and the last vestiges of hope from his soul. Below, the city of Muzurifu sprawled out, a vibrant tapestry of life and dreams that now felt impossibly distant, a world to which he no longer belonged. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful, cruel spectacle that his tear-blurred eyes could barely register. All Might's words echoed in the hollow space where his heart used to be. They weren't cruel words. They were kind, realistic, and utterly devastating. No, I don't think you can be a hero without a quirk. Each syllable was a perfectly aimed blow, shattering the foundation of his entire existence. He had clung to that dream for 10 years, a desperate, irrational lifeline in a world that had labeled him less than from the age of 4. He had studied, analyzed, and trained his body to its breaking point, all in service of a single, radiant goal. And in the span of 30 seconds, his idol, the symbol of peace, the man whose smile could save anyone, had snuffed it out like a candle flame. It's good to have dreams, young man. Just make sure they're attainable. He gripped the cold metal railing, his knuckles white. The jump had been so sudden, so powerful. All Might, in his true skeletal form, had leaped away with a gust of wind that nearly sent Izuku tumbling. A sonic boom, faint but sharp, was the punctuation mark on their conversation, the final word on Izuku's future. He was gone. The dream was over. A strange numbness settled over him. What now? What was a life without that dream? He imagined going home, his mother seeing his face, and having to tell her that everyone was right. That he was just a Deku, a useless, quirkless Deku who had wasted a decade chasing an impossible fantasy. The thought was a physical pain, a stone in his stomach. He turned from the railing, his movements slow and robotic, like a machine running on its last sputtering fumes of energy. He stumbled towards the stairwell door, each step a monumental effort. The concrete felt like quicksand. The world had lost its color, its vibrancy muted to a dull, oppressive gray. As he reached the ground floor and stepped out onto the street, the distant sound of an explosion jolted him from his stupor. A plume of black smoke climbed into the evening sky a few blocks away. People were running, not away, but towards the chaos, their phones held high. A villain attack. On any other day, Izuku's heart would have pounded with a mixture of fear and academic excitement. He would have been sprinting towards the scene, his notebook already in hand, ready to analyze, to learn. Today, he just stood there. What was the point? His notebooks were just childish scribbles. His analysis was the useless hobby of a delusional fanboy. The heroes would handle it. They always did. That was their job. A job he could never have. He started walking home, taking a different route, a long, winding path through back streets and underpasses, hoping to delay the inevitable confrontation with his own empty future. He kept his head down, the hood of his gakuren pulled low, trying to become invisible. The sounds of the city, the distant sirens, the chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of traffic, felt alien, a language he no longer understood. He was passing through the Tatooine shopping district when he saw the crowd again, thicker this time, blocking the alleyway where the smoke was thickest. He could hear the crackle of fire and the frantic shouts. Despite himself, his feet slowed. A morbid curiosity, the last twitching nerve of his old self, pulled him closer. He squeezed through the throng of onlookers, their faces a mixture of morbid fascination and fear. And then he saw it. It was the sludge villain. The same one that had attacked him earlier, the one All Might had captured in the soda bottles. It was free. And it had a hostage. The amorphous, sewage-green body was writhing, lashing out, but its core was wrapped tightly around a struggling figure. Explosions, small but violent, erupted from within the villain's form. They were sharp, concussive blasts that reeked of nitroglycerin. Izuku knew that quirk. He knew that furious, desperate energy. His blood ran cold. Through a gap in the sludge he saw a shock of spiky, ash-blonde hair and a pair of furious, terrified red eyes. Kaken. The world seemed to slow down. The heroes were there, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, the rookie heroine Empty Lady. But they were stuck. The alley was too narrow for Empty Lady, the fire was too intense for Kamui Woods' wooden form, and Death Arms couldn't get a grip on the fluid villain. They were holding a perimeter, saving civilians, but they weren't acting. They were waiting for someone with the right quirk. Izuku saw Bakugo's face again. The usual arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, primal fear. His mouth was covered, he couldn't breathe. The explosions were getting weaker. He was suffocating, he was dying. And the heroes were watching. Something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a plan. It was a primal, undeniable instinct that bypassed his broken heart and shattered dreams. His legs, which had felt like lead moments before, were moving. He was pushing through the stunned crowd, past the police barricade, past the shouts of the heroes. "Kid, stop! It's suicide!" Death Arms yelled, but Izuku didn't hear him. The world had narrowed to a single, desperate objective. His mind, the analytical engine he had honed for a decade, kicked into gear, working on pure adrenaline. Notebook number 13, page 25, Sludge Villain. Physical form is fluid and resistant to blunt force. Weakness, solid components, specifically the eyes and teeth, vulnerable to being dispersed if core structure is destabilized. Kaken's quirk, explosion. Requires palm sweat, which smells like burnt sugar. He can't breathe, his explosions are weakening. But if I can clear his airway, even for a second. His bright yellow backpack felt heavy on his shoulders. It was a stupid, childish thing, but it was all he had. With a scream that was more air than sound, he swung it off his shoulders and hurled it with every ounce of strength he possessed. The bag flew through the air, a clumsy, pathetic projectile, and struck the villain square in one of its large, bulbous eyes. The villain roared in pain and surprise, its form loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. "Kaken!" Izuku screamed, his fingers clawing uselessly at the sludge. He wasn't trying to pull Bakugo out. He knew that was impossible. He was digging, trying to clear the viscous fluid from his classmate's mouth and nose. "I couldn't just stand there and watch you die." For a fleeting moment, Bakugo's terrified red eyes met his. There was no anger, no contempt. Just shock. The villain recovered its senses, its liquid form coalescing. A massive tendril rose up, poised to smash Izuku into the grimy alley wall. This was it. This was how his useless life would end. He closed his eyes. "I am here!" A gale-force wind ripped through the alley. The familiar, booming voice was the most welcome sound Izuku had ever heard. He felt a powerful hand on his shoulder, pulling him back as a red, white, and blue blur shot past. Texas smash! The air pressure changed so violently that it created a vacuum. The sludge villain was atomized, splattered against the walls of the surrounding buildings. The fire was extinguished. The sky above the alley cleared as All Might's single punch changed the weather. It was over in an instant. The crowd erupted in cheers. Bakugo collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, while paramedics rushed to his side. Izuku stood trembling, covered in filth, the adrenaline leaving him weak and nauseous. He had acted. He, the quirkless Deku, had done something. Maybe All Might had been wrong. That fragile hope lasted for approximately 10 seconds. The first hero to reach him was Death Arms. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Are you insane, kid?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. "You have a death wish? You did absolutely nothing. You just got in the way and put yourself at risk." Kamui Woods was next, his wooden arms gesturing wildly. "We had the situation under control. Your little stunt could have gotten the hostage killed. There's a line between bravery and reckless stupidity, and you leaped over it." The words were like stones, pelting him, bruising him. He looked past them, searching for All Might's face, hoping for a nod, a sign of approval, anything. He saw the hero giving a thumbs up to the news cameras, his famous smile firmly in place. He didn't even look at Izuku. Publicly praised for his bravery, Bakugo was checked over by medics. Publicly scorned for his recklessness, Izuku was dragged to the side and lectured by a half-dozen pro-heroes and police officers. The shame was a physical heat on his cheeks, more intense than the nearby fires had been. He was a problem to be managed, a piece of trash to be swept aside after the real heroes had cleaned up the mess. He finally managed to slip away as the press swarmed all might. He walked, a ghost in his own life, the path home now a walk of shame. The earlier numbness was gone, replaced by an agony so profound it was almost silent. He hadn't just been told he couldn't be a hero. He had tried, in his own pathetic way, and had been punished for it. He had been shown, in front of the entire world, just how useless he truly was. He was a few blocks from his apartment complex, trudging through a grim, graffiti-scarred underpass, when a voice cut through his miserable haze. "I saw what you did, you know. I didn't need your damn help." Izuku turned. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, his school bag slung over his shoulder, his face unreadable. "I didn't need saving." Bakugo spat, his voice lacking its usual explosive force. It was quieter, laced with a confusing mixture of anger and something else. Humiliation. "I had it handled, so don't you go thinking you're better than me, you damn quirkless reject. Don't even look at me." With that, he turned and stomped off, leaving Izuku alone in the deepening twilight. That was the final blow. The last support beam holding him up crumbled into dust. Not even a thank you. Just scorn. Contempt. He was so worthless that even being saved by him was an insult. Tears finally began to fall, hot and silent. He stumbled into a side alley, a dead end filled with overflowing dumpsters and the stench of decay. He leaned against the cold brick wall and slid to the ground, curling into a ball. He was nothing. A zero. A negative. His existence was a mistake. All Might was right. The heroes were right. Kaken was right. He was just a Deku. It was in this moment, at the absolute nadir of his existence, that reality decided to tear itself open. A sound, like the crackle of dry leaves and the hum of 1,000 volts, filled the alley. The air grew thick with the scent of ozone and something else, something ancient and metallic. A few feet in front of him, the space began to shimmer. A pinprick of brilliant, viridian green light appeared, then expanded, tearing a hole in the fabric of the world. It was not a cork gate, not the clean teleportation he had seen from heroes. This was a raw, violent rupture, its edges fizzing with untamed power. From the swirling emerald vortex, a figure emerged. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, clad head to toe in armor that seemed to drink the fading light. It was a suit of gunmetal gray steel, impossibly advanced, with rivets and joints that bespoke masterful engineering. A forest green tunic was worn over the cuirass, held in place by a heavy leather belt with a golden, ornate clasp. A matching hooded cloak, clasped at the neck by 2 golden medallions, billowed behind him, untouched by the filthy alley air. But it was the mask that seized Izuku's breath. A cold, impassive plate of iron, forged into the likeness of a human face, with a grim, unmoving mouth and empty eye slits from which an intimidating intelligence seemed to burn. Izuku knew that armor. He knew that mask. He had seen it on the international news, in articles about global threats. It was the armor of a king. The armor of a tyrant. The armor of a man whose intellect and ambition were said to rival the power of All Might himself. Dr. Victor Von Doom. Izuku's mind went blank with a terror so pure it was almost serene. This was a supervillain. A real one. Not a petty thief or a mindless brute like the sludge villain. This was the sovereign ruler of Latveria, a man who had fought the greatest heroes of other worlds and stood his ground. He was in a dead-end alley with a monster. He was going to die. His last, pathetic act would be to get himself killed by a world-class villain for no reason at all. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the blow, for the searing pain of a plasma blast or the cold finality of a metal gauntlet hand closing around his throat. Instead, he heard a voice. It was deep, resonant, and amplified by some device within the helmet. It held no malice, only an unnerving, regal calm. Izuku Midoriya. His eyes snapped open. How did he know his name? Doom took another step forward, his armored boots making no sound on the cracked pavement. He stood over Izuku, a titan of steel and green cloth. The setting sun glinted off his helmet. You have had a difficult day, Doom stated, not as a question but as a fact. You were told your dream was unattainable by the one you idolize. You were then scorned by lesser men for acting when they stood frozen by incompetence and regulation. Finally, the one you saved repaid your courage with contempt. A perfect trifecta of failure, not on your part. On theirs. Izuku could only stare, his fear warring with a profound confusion. I have been observing, Doom continued, his voice a smooth, articulate baritone. He gestured vaguely with a gauntlet hand. My long-range sensors detected the chronospatial distortions that herald the arrival of your symbol of peace. A being of such power is a potential threat to global stability, and thus, an object of my scrutiny. In observing him, I observed you. He paused, letting the words sink in. Tell me, boy. Do you know what I saw? Izuku shook his head, a tiny, trembling motion. I did not see a failure, Doom said, his tone unwavering. I saw a mind at work. In your bag, which lies discarded in the filth over there, is a collection of notebooks. Hero analysis for the future, you call them. The men who scorned you would call them childish scribbles. I call them master-level strategic threat assessment. You deconstruct the abilities, tactics, and psychological weaknesses of the world's most powerful individuals. For a hobby, your intellect is a weapon, Izuku Midoriya, one you have honed in the absence of a physical gift. Izuku's breath hitched. Someone understood. Someone saw the value in what he did. And it was the last person in the world he ever would have expected. Then I saw you act, Doom went on, his voice taking on an edge of approval. You, with no powers, no armor, no support, charged a foe that had neutralized a half-dozen so-called pro-heroes. It was tactically foolish, an act of sheer desperation. But the will behind it, the absolute, indomitable will to act when all others falter, that is a quality that cannot be taught. It is the bedrock upon which empires are built. He took another step, his shadow falling completely over Izuku. This society has failed you. It has built a cult of personality around a single, smiling man, creating a populace of dependent sheep who look to the sky for salvation instead of forging it with their own hands. Its heroes are celebrities, more concerned with their approval ratings and merchandise sales than with true justice. They are agents of the status quo, preserving a flawed system that allows the chaos of villainy to fester in the shadows, only reacting when it spills into the light. Doom slowly clenched his gauntlet into a fist. The sound of grinding metal was soft, yet carried immense weight. Order. Stability. Prosperity. These are not achieved through flashy smiles and pyrotechnic battles in the streets. They are achieved through absolute will, unwavering vision, and the intellectual rigor to impose a better, more logical system upon the flawed chaos of mankind. They are achieved through control. He gestured to the alley around them. This filth. This crime. This despair. This is the fruit of their system. In my nation of Latveria, there is no crime. There is no poverty. There is no unemployment. There is only order. There is only doom. Izuku's mind was reeling. Every word Doom spoke resonated with a terrifying, undeniable logic. He had seen it himself, just today. The heroes waiting. The system failing. All Might's power was a temporary fix, a powerful bandage on a festering wound. But Doom was talking about a cure. You look to men like All Might and see a savior, Doom said, the empty eye slits of his mask boring into Izuku. I see a beautiful, gilded cage. He inspires hope, yes, but he also inspires dependence. He teaches the world that a single, gifted individual is their only answer. When he is gone, what then? Chaos will reign. His way is unsustainable. Doom knelt. It was a shocking gesture. This regal, powerful figure, kneeling in the filth to meet Izuku's gaze at eye level. The cold metal of his mask was only a foot away. They told you that your lack of a quirk makes you worthless. They are fools. A quirk is a crutch. It is an accident of birth that breeds arrogance and complacency. You, Izuku Midoriya, have been freed from that crutch. Your entire life, you have been forced to rely on the one thing that truly matters, your mind. Your will. He raised a hand, not in a threatening gesture, but an offering one. His gauntlet was open, the polished metal gleaming. I will not offer you a quirk. Such gifts are for the weak. I offer you something far more valuable. I offer you knowledge. I will give you access to the accumulated science of a dozen disciplines, from quantum mechanics to cybernetic engineering. I will teach you the subtle arts of strategy, politics, and manipulation. I will even open your mind to the forces that lie beyond science, to the mystic arts that your blinkered society dismisses as fantasy. His voice dropped to an intense, compelling whisper. I will take the brilliant mind you possess and forge it into an intellect that will make the cleverest men on this planet seem like children. I will take the indomitable will you have shown and temper it into an unbreakable iron resolve. I will give you the tools, the armor, the power, real power, earned through merit, not genetic luck, to enact true, lasting change upon this broken world. The offer hung in the air, immense and terrifying. It was a poison apple, a deal with the devil. Everything Izuku had ever been taught screamed at him to refuse, to run, to scream for a hero. But which hero? The one who had left him on a rooftop? The ones who had called him a suicidal idiot? Doom's words echoed in his head, dismantling his entire worldview piece by piece. He thought of his notebooks, filled with analysis that Doom called master level. He thought of his charge into the alley, an act Doom called a display of indomitable will. This villain, this monster from the news, saw more worth in him than anyone in his entire life ever had. All Might had seen a liability. Doom saw potential. You wish to be a hero, Doom said, his voice soft, almost paternal. A noble, if misguided ambition. The desire to save others is the core of your being, but you cannot save the world by punching criminals one at a time. You save the world by seizing its reins and steering it away from the abyss. You save it by creating a system so perfect, so orderly, that crime and suffering wither and die for lack of fertile soil. He stood up, once again a towering figure of immense power. They told you that you could not be a hero. He spread his arms wide, his green cloak billowing as if stirred by an unfelt wind. I will make you a king, a king. The word was alien. It was so far beyond the scope of his small, broken dreams that it almost didn't register. Heroes saved people. Kings ruled them, but as Doom said, perhaps ruling them was the only way to truly save them. This was his choice. He could go home, back to his empty room, to a future as a police officer or a doctor, forever a spectator in a world of wonders, his soul slowly shriveling until nothing was left. Or he could take this hand. This terrifying, morally ambiguous, ironclad hand. It was a path into darkness, of that he had no doubt. But it was a path. And it was the only one being offered. The tears had stopped. A cold, quiet clarity settled over him. His dream was dead. Long live the dream. Izuku Midoriya pushed himself up from the grimy ground. He stood on wobbly legs, a skinny, tear-streaked, corkless boy covered in sewer filth. He looked up at the impassive iron mask of Dr. Doom, the most powerful and dangerous man he had ever met. He bowed his head, not in submission, but in acceptance. A quiet, resolute finality settled in his heart. I accept. The words were barely a whisper, but in the silent alley, they rang with the force of a death knell for the boy he had been, and a coronation for the man he was about to become. Dr. Doom did not smile. His mask, of course, could not. But Izuku felt a wave of palpable satisfaction emanating from the man. He gave a single, solemn nod. Excellent. He turned and gestured toward the swirling, green portal, which had remained open, a patient, humming wound in reality. Your tutelage begins now. The past is ash. Your future will be forged in the fires of Latveria. Izuku took a deep breath, the foul air of the alley filling his lungs for the last time. He gave one final, fleeting thought to his mother, to All Might's smile, to the dream he had cherished for so long. Then he let it go. He squared his shoulders, walked past the overflowing dumpsters, and stepped through the portal without looking back. The viridian light consumed him, and the alley was empty once more. The only evidence that anything had transpired was a discarded, bright yellow backpack lying in the dirt, a forgotten relic of a life that was now over. The transition was not a gentle passage. It was a violent, sensory assault. Izuku felt as though he were being unraveled and rewoven simultaneously, his atoms stretched across an impossible, screaming void of emerald green and chaotic energy. The stench of ozone and brimstone filled his lungs, and a deafening roar, like the birth of a star, consumed all thought. He squeezed his eyes shut, a primal fear seizing him, a panicked voice in his head screaming that he had made a terrible, irreversible mistake. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The roar ceased, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The violent energy vanished, leaving a strange tingle on his skin. He felt solid ground beneath his feet, cold, polished stone. The foul air of the alley was gone, replaced by an atmosphere so clean and crisp it felt sterile, tinged with the faint, metallic scent of machinery and the clean fragrance of rain on stone. He dared to open his eyes. The world he had left behind, a world of vibrant, almost cartoonish colors, of bright advertisements and cheerful hero billboards, was gone. He stood in a hall of impossible scale. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above, lost in shadow, supported by massive pillars of black marble veined with what looked like glowing green circuitry. The walls were a stark, Gothic tapestry of dark stone, but they were not ancient. Embedded within them were holographic displays flickering with complex equations and global weather patterns. Light came not from lamps or windows, but from the ethereal green glow of the technology itself, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to drink the warmth from the air. It was a fusion of a medieval cathedral and a futuristic supercomputer, a monument to both tyrannical power and transcendent intellect. "Welcome, Izuku Midoriya!" Dr. Doom's voice boomed, echoing in the cavernous space. "To Castle Doom! Welcome to your new reality!" Izuku turned slowly, his small frame utterly dwarfed by his surroundings. He was in some kind of throne room or grand hall. At the far end, raised on a dais of polished obsidian, sat a single, imposing throne of chrome and iron. Behind it, a vast, floor-to-ceiling window of armored glass looked out not upon a city, but upon the churning, cloud-swept peaks of the Carpathian Mountains. The view was majestic, terrifying, and utterly isolating. He had never felt so small. Where are we?" he whispered, his voice sounding thin and pathetic in the immense hall. "We are in the heart of the royal kingdom of Latveria," Doom answered, his voice devoid of the amplification it had needed in the alley. Here, in his own domain, his natural voice commanded the space. He walked past Izuku, his armored boots clicking with sharp, authoritative taps on the floor. "The only truly sane nation on this chaotic planet. Come!" Without waiting for a reply, Doom swept towards a large archway. Izuku, feeling a magnetic pull of command he was powerless to resist, scurried to follow. They emerged onto a wide balcony overlooking a city. Doomstat. Izuku's breath caught in his throat. It was unlike any city he had ever seen. The architecture was a continuation of the castle's theme. Gothic spires and stone facades interwoven with gleaming metal, clean lines, and glowing green energy conduits. There were no garish advertisements, no brightly colored hero logos. Instead, there were statues. Grand, heroic statues of Dr. Doom himself, standing in plazas, on the corners of buildings, watching over the populace with an iron gaze. The streets below were impeccably clean, laid out in a perfect, logical grid. Sleek, silent electric vehicles moved in harmonious patterns, never exceeding the speed limit, never cutting one another off. The people, the citizens of Latveria, walked the wide boulevards with a sense of purpose. They were well-dressed, well-fed, and quiet. There was no boisterous laughter, no shouting, no chaotic energy that defined the cities of Japan. There was a placid, almost unnerving sense of order. When they saw the figure of their ruler on the balcony of his castle, they did not cheer. They stopped, turned, and placed a fist over their heart in a gesture of silent, unified reverence. "Behold Izuku Midoriya," Doom said, his voice resonating with pride. "My proof. You see no homeless cluttering the streets. You see no criminals preying on the weak. You see no garish heroes performing for cameras while the true rot of society festers beneath the surface. You see only peace, prosperity, order, an engine of civilization running at peak efficiency. They seem afraid." Izuku managed, the observation slipping out before he could stop it. Doom turned his helmeted head slowly to face him. Izuku flinched, but the sovereign's voice was not angry. It was instructive. "You mistake discipline for fear. You mistake respect for terror. Your society has taught you that freedom is the ultimate virtue. A lie. Unfettered freedom is chaos. It is the freedom to starve, the freedom to be victimized, the freedom to fail. I have given my people a greater gift, freedom from want, freedom from crime, freedom from the crippling anxiety of choice in a world that offers them only poor options. He gestured again to the city below. Every citizen has a home, a purpose, and the protection of their sovereign. In return, they provide their loyalty and their labor. A simple, logical transaction. It is a system that works, not because of a genetic lottery that grants one man the power to punch harder than others, but because it was designed by a superior intellect. My intellect. Izuku looked at the orderly city, at the silent, respectful citizens, and thought of the alley he had just left. The chaos, the fear, the heroes standing by, the villain reveling in destruction. He thought of Bakugo's scorn and All Might's pity. Doom's words were terrifying. They were the words of a dictator, but as he looked at the evidence before him, a traitorous part of his mind couldn't help but whisper, "But he's not wrong. Your indoctrination begins now," Doom declared, turning from the balcony. "Forget the useless trivia you were taught in your public schools. Your mind is a fallow field. I shall plant the seeds of true knowledge." What followed was not a single lesson, but a deluge. The next few weeks blurred into a grueling, relentless baptism by fire in the forges of Doom's intellect. Izuku was given a simple, Spartan room in the castle, a chamber of gray stone with a bed, a desk, and a terminal. His days were regimented with an ironclad discipline he had never known. He was awoken at 0500 hours by a soft, automated chime. A nutrient paste, bland but scientifically formulated for optimal cognitive function, was delivered to his room. His training began at 0600. His first classroom was the castle library. It was a space that defied logic, a massive, multi-leveled rotunda that seemed larger on the inside than out. One wall was lined with ancient, leather-bound tomes containing knowledge that predated quirks, filled with the writings of Plato, Sun Tzu, and Machiavelli. The other walls were seamless screens of light, holding a digital library so vast it contained the entire collected knowledge of the human race, and Izuku suspected, knowledge that was not human at all. Doom himself was his primary tutor. He was a terrifyingly effective teacher, impatient with failure, intolerant of stupidity, but possessed of a clarity that was breathtaking. A quirk is a single book, often a short and brutishly simple one, which the owner reads over and over their entire life. Doom stated on the first day, gesturing to the library around them. "I am offering you the entire library. Your capacity to learn is your only limitation." Izuku, who had always been a diligent student, found that his mind, once laser-focused on the minutiae of hero quirks, was now a ravenous sponge for real, applicable knowledge. His habit of muttering analysis, once a source of mockery, was now his greatest tool. He devoured quantum physics, his mumbling no longer about All Might's wine pressure but about the probabilistic nature of wave-particle duality. He consumed engineering schematics, learning the principles of plasma containment, repulsor technology, and cybernetic integration. He studied political science and history, seeing the rise and fall of empires not as stories, but as a complex series of logical, predictable failures in leadership that Doom intended to correct. He was tutored by Latveria's finest minds, stern men and women who were masters of their fields and fanatically loyal to Doom. They pushed him relentlessly, piling on data, challenging him with complex problems that made his brain ache. But for the first time in his life, the ache was a good one. It was the burn of a muscle being built. He was not Deku, the useless one. Here, his intellect was the only thing that mattered. Here, his mind was his power. When he wasn't absorbing science and humanities, he was in the castle's advanced laboratories. These were not the sterile, white-walled labs of his school. They were workshops, filled with the scent of hot metal and solder, where robotic arms worked with micrometer precision and plasma cutters sliced through plates of titanium alloy. Under the watchful eye of a stoic engineer named Gustav, Izuku learned to build. His hands, once clumsy and used only for writing, became steady and precise. He learned to weld, to code, to fabricate microcircuitry. His first project was to repair a damaged Doom bot, one of Doom's robotic sentinels. It took him a week of frustrating, painstaking work, tracing burnout logic paths and replacing fried servos. When the robot's optic sensors finally glowed green and it rose to attention, saluting him with a metallic clank, A surge of pride unlike anything he had ever felt coursed through him. It was a feeling of accomplishment, of creation. His education was not limited to the physical sciences. One day, Doom led him deep into the castle's sublevels, to a chamber that felt fundamentally different from the rest. The air was cold and smelled of dust, old parchment, and a strange, electric tang of ozone that reminded him of the portal. There were no computers here. The walls were lined with books bound in strange leathers and locked with iron clasps. The center of the room was dominated by an obsidian circle inlaid with silver runes that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of his vision. "Your science has its limits, boy," Doom said, his voice a low hum in the unsettling quiet. "It can explain the workings of the universe, but there are other, older laws. Laws of power that your blinkered society dismisses as folklore." "Magic," Izuku stared. "Magic? But that's not real. It's a violation of the laws of thermodynamics, of causality." Doom let out a short, sharp sound that might have been a laugh. "The laws of thermodynamics are but one chapter in a much larger codex. You perceive the universe through a keyhole and believe you have seen the entire room." He raised a gauntlet hand. He spoke a single word, a guttural syllable in a language Izuku did not recognize. A globe of pure, golden light bloomed in his palm, pulsing with a warmth that had nothing to do with combustion. Izuku's scientifically trained mind screamed in protest. There was no power source, no energy conversion, no logical explanation. It simply was. "Magic is not fantasy," Doom explained, closing his hand and extinguishing the light. "It is a different kind of science, a manipulation of cosmic energies and dimensional planes through force of will and esoteric knowledge. It is a tool. And like any tool, it can be mastered. You will learn its basics. You will learn to recognize it, to shield yourself from it, and to understand its place in the true calculus of power." Izuku's worldview, already shattered and rebuilt once, was fractured anew. He began to study the ancient texts, his analytical mind struggling to find patterns and systems in the arcane symbols and incantations. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, an assault on the very foundations of his logical mind, but it opened his eyes to a universe far vaster and more complex than he had ever imagined. Alongside his mental conditioning was a physical regimen of brutal intensity. His body, scrawny and underdeveloped, was to be reforged just as his mind was. He was not being trained to be a brawler like All Might. Doom's philosophy was one of efficiency. "Your body is a vehicle for your mind." His trainer, a former Special Forces soldier with cold, unforgiving eyes, told him on their first day in the castle's state-of-the-art gymnasium. "It must be reliable, durable, and efficient. Wasted energy is failure." His training consisted of grueling calisthenics that pushed him to the point of collapse, flexibility exercises that felt like torture, and the study of a martial art that was less about flashy kicks and more about brutal, efficient takedowns, joint locks, and disarms. He ran for miles through the cold mountain air every morning, his lungs burning, his legs screaming, until his endurance surpassed anything he thought possible. He was shedding his old self, burning away the weak, hesitant boy in the crucible of this new life. Months passed. The seasons began to turn on the mountain peaks outside the castle window. Izuku grew taller, his frame filling out with lean, hard muscle. The perpetual tremor of anxiety that had defined his childhood was replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. His stutter vanished. His slouch straightened into a confident posture. The freckles on his cheeks remained, a last vestige of the boy he had been, but his eyes were different. The wide, hero-worshipping innocence was gone, replaced by a keen, analytical light. They were the eyes of a strategist, a builder, a scholar. They were the eyes of someone who understood power. He rarely thought of his old life. The memories felt like they belonged to someone else. When he did, it was with a cold, detached analysis. All Might's rejection was no longer a personal wound. It was a data point on the failure of Hero's society. Bakugo's bullying was not a source of trauma. It was an example of the arrogance bred by innate, unearned power. He was being reforged, and the process was painful, but the result was a strength he had never known. One evening, after a grueling 16-hour day of study and training, Doom summoned him to one of the main forges deep within the castle. The air was thick with the heat of plasma furnaces and the percussive clang of automated hammers shaping metal. You have absorbed the theory, Doom stated, his voice cutting through the industrial din. He gestured to a workbench where an array of components was laid out, sheets of a lightweight titanium iron alloy, bundles of fiber optic cabling, raw power cells, and sophisticated microprocessors. You have demonstrated rudimentary practical skill. Now you will create. You will build your first weapon. Your first tool of will. On a holographic display above the bench, a schematic glowed. It was a design for a pair of armored gauntlets. They were sleek, angular, and far more complex than anything Izuku had worked on before. Integrated into the palms were focused plasma emitters, repulsors. The bracers themselves housed projectors for a small, localized energy shield. The materials are provided, Doom said. The design is a template. The assembly, the power calibration, the integration of the firing systems, that is your task. I will provide no assistance. Succeed, and you will have taken your first true step on the path to power. Fail, and you will prove you are not worthy of my investment. With that, he turned and left Izuku alone in the echoing forge. For the next 2 weeks, the forge became Izuku's entire world. He slept on a cot in the corner for a few hours at a time, surviving on nutrient paste and sheer, obsessive determination. The project consumed him. It was a final exam of everything he had learned. He applied his knowledge of physics to calibrate the magnetic containment field for the plasma. He used his engineering skills to mill the alloy plates and assemble the articulated finger joints. He spent hours hunched over the delicate circuitry, his hands steady, soldering connections so small they were barely visible to the naked eye. He wrote thousands of lines of code for the targeting and power management software, his fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. He failed. Over and over again. The first power cell he built overloaded and melted into slag. A miscalculation in the repulsor array caused a feedback loop that blew a 3-inch wide hole in a nearby wall. The shield projector flickered and died, shorted out by a misplaced wire. Each failure was a stab of frustration, a whisper of his old self telling him he was a useless Deku. But each time, the training kicked in. He did not despair. He analyzed the failure. He disassembled the components, identified the flaw in his design or execution, corrected it, and began again. The discipline forged in him by Doom's unforgiving tutelage would not allow him to quit. He was no longer the boy who cried when things got hard. He was a problem solver. This was just another, more complex problem. Finally, after 14 days of relentless effort, it was done. The 2 gauntlets sat on the workbench, gleaming under the forge lights. They were not perfect. There were small scratches on the metal from where his tools had slipped, and the energy conduits had a slightly uneven, handmade quality. But they were whole. They were his. With a deep, steadying breath, he disconnected them from the diagnostic machine and slid them on. They were heavier than he expected, the cold metal a solid, reassuring weight on his arms. The inner lining hummed to life, conforming to his hands. A simple heads-up display, projected from the gauntlets onto a nearby monitor for testing, flickered into existence, showing power levels, targeting reticles, and shield integrity. Everything was green. He walked to the testing range at the far end of the forge, his heart hammering against his ribs. A thick sheet of plasteel, used for testing armor-piercing rounds, stood 100 feet away. He took a stance, just as his combat instructor had taught him, feet shoulder-width apart, body stable. He raised his right hand, palm forward. The targeting reticle on the monitor locked onto the center of the plasteel sheet. He took a breath and willed it to fire. A low hum escalated into a high-pitched whine. The emitter on his palm glowed with a brilliant, blue-white light. Then, with a concussive THOM that was both a sound and a physical kick against his arm, a bolt of pure energy erupted from his hand. It crossed the distance in an instant, a lance of coherent light, and struck the target dead center. The impact was immense. The plasteel plate didn't just dent, it vaporized. A perfect, molten circle, glowing cherry red at the edges, appeared where the bolt had hit. The air smelled of superheated metal and ionized air. Izuku stood frozen, his arms still outstretched. His ears were ringing. His arm ached from the recoil. He stared at his hand, at the gauntlet that covered it, smoke wafting from the emitter. This was power. It was not a quirk. It was not a gift from genetics, or a lucky accident of birth. It was not something passed down from someone else. He could trace the lineage of this power back through every sleepless night, every failed calculation, every drop of sweat and blood he had poured into its creation. It was the product of physics, engineering, and sheer, unrelenting will. It was his. In that moment, standing in the heart of a Latvian forge, he finally understood. The desperate, painful yearning for a quirk that had defined his entire life simply evaporated. Why would he ever want a single, limited power he hadn't earned, when he now possessed the knowledge to build any power he could conceive of? Well done, the voice came from the shadows. Izuku turned, startled, to see Dr. Doom standing there, arms crossed over his chest. He must have been watching the entire time. Doom walked forward, his gaze fixed on the glowing hole in the plasteel target, then on the gauntlet on Izuku's arm. Your design is crude, Doom stated, his voice a clinical critique. The power regulation is inefficient. You are losing almost 30% of the energy from the cell as heat dissipation. The recoil system is rudimentary. The targeting software is adequate, but lacks predictive capability. He paused. It is, however, functional. A remarkable achievement for a first attempt. Coming from Doom, the blunt praise was more impactful than 1,000 flowery compliments from anyone else. Feel it, boy, Doom said, his voice dropping, taking on that compelling, instructive tone. That power is yours. Forged by your intellect. Tempered by your will. Earned through merit. Now tell me, does the thought of some brutish inherited ability to create explosions from your palms still hold any appeal? Izuku looked down at his gauntlet, then clenched his hand into a fist. The articulated metal plates slid over each other with a soft, satisfying hiss. For the first time, he felt no envy for Kaken. He felt only a distant, clinical pity. Bakugo was a man with a hammer, and to him, every problem was a nail. Izuku was now a man who could build any tool he required. He looked up, his green eyes meeting the empty slits of Doom's mask. The last vestiges of the crying, hero-worshipping boy from Muzutafu were gone, burned away in the plasma fire of his own creation. No, master, Izuku said, his voice clear and steady, echoing in the vast, hot forge. It holds no appeal at all. 8 months. 8 months since Izuku Midoriya had walked through a tear in reality, leaving behind a world that had deemed him worthless. In that time, the boy who was once Deku had been systematically dismantled, his components analyzed, and reassembled into something new. Something stronger. The forges of Latveria were not merely for metal, they were for the soul, and Izuku's had been tempered in their unrelenting heat. His days were no longer filled with the anxious energy of a hopeful fanboy, but with the cold, measured discipline of an acolyte. Mornings began before the sun crested the Carpathian peaks, with a grueling physical regimen that pushed his body to its absolute limits. He moved with an economy of motion that belied his age, his once clumsy form now a tightly coiled spring of lean muscle and precise control. He could break down and reassemble a plasma rifle blindfolded in under 90 seconds. He could hold his breath for 4 minutes. He could debate the ethical fallacies of representative democracy with Doom himself, citing historical precedents from the fall of Rome to the modern hero-industrial complex. The constant, frantic muttering that had once been his trademark had not vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer the sound of anxious insecurity. It was the hum of a high-performance engine processing data, a low, continuous stream of calculations, threat assessments, and chemical equations. His mind had become a fortress, its walls built from quantum mechanics and political theory, its foundations laid in the arcane arts. He had not seen another person his age in 8 months. His only companions were stoic tutors, robotic assistants, and the towering, omnipresent figure of his master. The loneliness that might have crushed the old Izuku was a sensation he now catalogued as an inefficient emotional state. Attachments were vulnerabilities. Doom had taught him that. He was in the midst of a combat simulation, the training chamber's holographic walls configured to replicate a dense urban environment. 5 advanced Doombots, programmed with the fighting styles of top 10 pro heroes, converged on his position. The old Izuku would have panicked, his mind freezing in the face of such overwhelming odds. The new Izuku simply analyzed. Target Alpha, modeled on Endeavor. Long-range, high-temperature plasma attacks. Armor vulnerable to cryoaerosols. Target Beta, Hawk's model. High-speed kinetic projectiles. Predictable flight patterns. Ground him. Target Gamma, Mirko model. His movements were a blur of fluid, brutal efficiency. He slid behind cover, the gauntlets he had built, now heavily modified and refined, humming on his arms. He fired a volley of miniature drones from a dispenser on his belt. They swarmed Target Beta, releasing a localized electromagnetic pulse that fried its guidance systems. The bot crashed into a holographic wall and dissolved into pixels. He rolled out, firing a focused cryobeam from his left gauntlet at the Endeavor bot. The superheated plasma cannon on its shoulder hissed, flash freezing and cracking. Izuku closed the distance, his body moving in a low, powerful stance. He didn't throw a wild punch. He struck the bot's knee joint with a precise, armor-reinforced palm-heel strike, shattering the actuator. As the bot stumbled, he vaulted onto its back, plunged a data spike into its primary processor, and uploaded a shutdown command. 2 down. He dispatched the remaining 3 with a similar, terrifying calculus of violence. He used the environment, ricocheting plasma shots off walls, triggering holographic gas mains, turning their own strengths against them. The entire engagement lasted 47 seconds. When the simulation ended and the lights came up, he was not breathing heavily. He was merely running a diagnostic, his eyes scanning the data stream projected on the training room wall. Efficiency rating, 92.7%. Wasted energy on 2 unnecessary evasive maneuvers. Could have neutralized target Delta 1.3 seconds sooner with a direct spinal strike. Must improve. Your progress is satisfactory. The voice, deep and resonant, came from the observation deck above. Dr. Doom stood there, a silent sentinel in green and gray, looking down upon his student. He had been there the entire time, his presence a constant, pressing weight of expectation. The physical application of your knowledge is now adequate. Doom continued as he descended a flight of stark metal stairs. But theory and simulation are merely the whetstone. It is time to sharpen the blade. He led Izuku from the training chamber, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous stone hallways. They walked in silence, a master and his apprentice, their dynamic one of hierarchical respect, not of warmth. They arrived before a set of immense, circular steel doors, etched with Latverian insignia and complex circuitry. With a gesture from Doom, the doors hissed open, revealing a chamber unlike any Izuku had seen before. It was a personal armory, but it had the reverent atmosphere of a shrine. The lighting was low, focused on a single platform in the center of the room. Here, technology and ceremony intertwined. This was the Sanctum Armorum, the place where Doom's will was given physical form. Upon the central platform, illuminated by a single, stark white spotlight, stood a suit of armor. Izuku stopped dead, his breath catching in his chest. It was not a copy of Doom's own bulky, intimidating armor. This was something different. It was sleek, aerodynamic, and clearly tailored for a smaller, more agile frame. Its primary color was a deep, forest green, the same shade as Doom's tunic, but rendered in a matte, non-reflective metal alloy. Panels of dark, gunmetal gray covered the joints and torso, breaking up the silhouette. The lines were sharp, modern, almost predatory. It lacked the regal ornamentation of Doom's suit. There was no cloak, no tunic. This was a tool, not a king's regalia. The helmet was a masterwork of intimidating design. It flowed seamlessly from the armored gorget, its faceplate a smooth, featureless visor of polarized black obsidian. There were no eyes, no mouth, no hint of the person within. It was an anonymous, terrifying mask of pure function. Green light pulsed softly from thin channels of energy that traced the armor's form, hinting at the immense power contained within. For 8 months you have been my student, Doom said, his voice echoing in the chamber. You have absorbed knowledge that would take lesser men a lifetime to comprehend. You have reforged your body and your mind. But you have lacked a proper vessel, a mantle to signify your purpose. He gestured to the suit. This is that mantle. A lightweight, polymer-infused steel weave, resistant to small arms fire and energy weapons. Microservos in every joint amplify your strength and speed tenfold. Its power core is a miniaturized beta particle reactor, capable of sustained operation for 72 hours. The helmet's heads-up display is linked directly to the castle's tactical network, providing you with real-time satellite data, threat analysis, and strategic overlays. The armor was a masterpiece, a perfect synthesis of everything Izuku had been studying. It was defense, offense, and a supercomputer all in one. The name Deku was a brand of failure, burned into you by a jealous fool, Doom stated, his voice cold. It is a name you will never answer to again. The world will not know you as Izuku Midoriya. That boy is a ghost, a fiction for a world you have left behind. When you wear this armor, you will have a new designation. A title that reflects your purpose and your potential. He stepped closer, the light glinting off his own iron mask. You are my prodigy. My intellectual heir. A testament to the power of a superior mind unshackled from the weakness of the flesh. Now don your armor, prodigy. With a sense of profound, solemn gravity, Izuku stepped onto the platform. The armor opened up with a series of soft, pneumatic hisses, the chest plate retracting, the limbs separating just enough for him to step inside. He did so, his heart hammering not with excitement, but with the immense weight of the moment. The armor closed around him, fitting to his form as if it had been molded for him. He felt the pinprick of a neural interface needle in the back of his neck, a painless connection that synced his thoughts to the suit's systems. For a moment, there was darkness and silence. Then, the world exploded into light and data. The HUD flared to life, a panoramic view of the armory overlaid with streams of information. Power levels, atmospheric composition, his own biometric data, a tactical mini-map of the castle. He could feel the suit's power, a low thrum that vibrated through his bones. He raised a hand, and the armor mimicked the motion instantly, silently. He was not wearing a suit, he was the suit. The line between man and machine had blurred. The featureless black visor sealed shut, and the world outside became a digital representation, every detail enhanced and analyzed. He was looking at Dr. Doom, but he was also seeing the suit's analysis. Subject, Victor Von Doom. No discernible weaknesses. Threat level, absolute. The armor is a part of you now, Doom's voice said, filtered through the suit's auditory sensors. Its power is your power. Its will is your will. And your will is my will. It is time for your final exam, a field test, a holographic map projected from the wall, showing the mountainous borders of Latveria. A red circle highlighted a remote, forested region bordering the politically unstable nation of Sankaria. This is the territory of the Kava Syndicate, Doom explained. A human trafficking ring that has operated with impunity for years. They abduct the desperate and the disenfranchised from the neighboring failed states, using them for slave labor and worse. They are a cancer. Izuku processed the information, his mind already running strategic analyses. Why have the local heroes not intervened? Politics. Doom spat the word as if it were poison. Jurisdictional squabbles. The heroes of Sankaria claim the syndicate operates just inside Latverian borders, absolving them of responsibility. The Latverian defense grid, by my own design, is primarily automated and focused on external military threats, not internal criminal enterprises of this nature. The syndicate exploits this bureaucratic seam, this flaw in the system. The pro-heroes of the world, for all their power, are shackled by borders and regulations. They posture and preen for the cameras while this filth festers in the shadows. They are, as always, ineffective. The mission parameters appeared on Izuku's HUD. It was not a heroic call to action. It was a military directive. Objective, dismantle Kava Syndicate operations. Primary, neutralize all Syndicate operatives. Secondary, liberate all captive personnel. Tertiary, acquire all Syndicate assets, weaponry, data, finances. Parameters, absolute efficiency. Minimal collateral damage. No witnesses. You will go alone, Doom commanded. You will use the tools and the training I have given you. You will not engage in a heroic brawl. You will be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. You will excise this cancer with surgical precision. Show me you have learned. 3 hours later, Prodigy stood on a pine-covered ridge overlooking a deep, secluded valley. Night had fallen, and the moon was obscured by thick clouds. Through his visor's thermal and electromagnetic vision modes, the Syndicate's compound was laid out before him like a glowing schematic. It was a repurposed logging facility, surrounded by a crude electrified fence and dotted with watchtowers. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter. The old Izuku would have been terrified. The new Izuku felt only a cold, predatory calm. This was not a fight. This was a problem to be solved. For the next hour, he did not move. He became a ghost on the ridge, his armor's chameleon-like surface blending into the rock and shadow. He deployed 3 microdrones, each the size of a dragonfly. They zipped silently into the compound, their optical sensors feeding him a complete, 3-dimensional map of the facility. He marked the location of every guard, every camera, every power conduit. His HUD glowed with tactical data, guard patrol routes traced in red, structural weaknesses highlighted in yellow. He listened. His suit's parabolic microphone picked up the guards' chatter. He learned their names, their complaints about the cold, the shoddy quality of their rifles. He located their communications hub and, with a few silent commands, his suit's hacking suite piggybacked on their Wi-Fi signal. Within minutes, he had complete control of their network. Their cameras now showed a looping video of an empty compound. Their comms were his to command. Phase 1, reconnaissance. Complete. He moved from the ridge, his descent a silent, controlled slide down the rocky incline. The armor's servos were utterly silent. He reached the electrified fence. A frontal assault was illogical. Instead, he approached the main power generator, located 100 yards outside the main fence. The 2 guards stationed there were lax, sharing a cigarette, their quirks. One could slightly elongate his fingers, the other could spit a weak acid, pathetically useless. He did not announce his presence. From the shadows, his gauntlet fired 2 flechettes, each containing a potent sedative. The darts were silent, striking the guards in the neck. They crumpled to the ground without a sound. Prodigy dragged their unconscious forms into the woods before calmly walking to the generator. He didn't destroy it. That would alert the entire compound. He opened the control panel and rerouted the power, disabling the fence and creating a subtle, cascading power failure in non-essential systems that would cause confusion later. Phase 2, infiltration. In progress. He slipped through the now-dead fence and moved like a phantom through the compound. He was a whisper of green and gray in the shadows. The first interior guard he encountered had a minor strength-enhancing quirk. Prodigy observed him for 13 seconds, noted he favored his right side, then dropped from the roof of a storage shed behind him. Before the man could even register his presence, Prodigy's hand clamped over his mouth while his other arm wrapped around his chest in a perfect sleeper hold. The man struggled for a few seconds, then went limp. He neutralized 6 more guards in this manner, each takedown a model of ruthless efficiency. 1, a woman who could generate blinding flashes of light from her skin, was disabled by his visor instantly polarizing to full opacity while a sonic emitter on his suit produced a frequency that incapacitated her without a sound. Another, a brute with rock-like skin, was felled not by a punch, but by a precisely aimed taser charge to the vulnerable joint at the back of his knee, followed by a tranquilizer injection. He analyzed their quirks and used their weaknesses against them with the cold precision of a scientist dissecting a lab rat. He reached the main building, a large, 2-story structure where the captives were being held. It was here he initiated the next phase of his plan. Using his control of their comms, he broadcast a single, looping message on a priority channel. Security breach at the East Gate. All hands respond. Code Red. He watched on his tactical map as the remaining guards, in a state of panicked confusion, abandoned their posts and rushed towards a non-existent threat. Amateurs. Prodigy entered the now undefended building. The ground floor was a barracks and mess hall. The upper floor, according to the drone schematics, was the leader's office and the holding pens. As he ascended the stairs, he heard voices. The syndicate leader, a large, imposing man named Kava, was shouting at his lieutenant. "What do you mean you can't raise them? Find out what's happening at that gate." Prodigy stood outside the office door. He didn't kick it in. He simply raised his gauntlet, and a small, localized plasma cutter sliced through the locking mechanism with a faint sizzle. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Kava and his lieutenant spun around, their eyes wide with shock. Kava's quirk was obvious. His arms were covered in thick, overlapping scales, like a pangolin. The lieutenant was already raising a pistol. Prodigy was faster. A high-impact kinetic blast from his gauntlet, essentially a compressed air cannon, struck the lieutenant in the chest, sending him flying across the room to slam into the far wall. Unconscious, Kava roared and charged, his scaled arms raised to bludgeon. It was the exact reaction Prodigy had predicted. He didn't meet the charge with force. He sidestepped with fluid grace, his legs sweeping out to kick Kava's ankle. The large man, overcommit and unbalanced, stumbled. Prodigy flowed with his momentum, grabbing Kava's arm, twisting it, and using the man's own weight to slam him face first onto his large wooden desk. A sharp, precise chop to the back of his neck, reinforced by the armor's servos, and the syndicate leader collapsed. The entire confrontation took less than 5 seconds. He stood in the silent office, the two most powerful men in the compound unconscious at his feet. There was no thrill of victory, no surge of heroic pride. There was only the quiet satisfaction of a successfully executed plan. He located the release mechanism for the holding cells and activated it. Then, he walked to the back of the office, where a dozen cages held the syndicate's victims. They were gaunt, terrified people, blinking in the sudden light, staring at the dark, silent armored figure who had appeared from nowhere. One of them, a young woman, whispered, Are you a hero?" Prodigy looked at them through his impassive, black visor. He saw their fear, their desperation, their hope. The old Izuku would have rushed to them, offering words of comfort, promising them that everything would be all right. He would have smiled. But he was not the old Izuku. A smile was an inefficient display of emotion. Comfort was not his mission. "A Latverian extraction team will be here in 10 minutes, he said, his voice a cold, synthesized monotone, filtered through the helmet's speakers. "They will provide food, medical attention, and transport. The exit is clear. Do not deviate from the path." He turned and walked away, leaving them to their stunned freedom. He did not wait for their thanks. He did not need it. The mission was complete. He moved to Kava's main computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he downloaded all of their financial records, shipping manifests, and client lists. Tertiary objective, complete. As he finished, he heard a sound behind him. He turned to see the young woman from the cell standing there, her thin frame trembling. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with tears. "Whoever you are, thank you." Prodigy paused. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of the old Izuku, the boy who desperately wanted to save people with a smile, surfaced. A ghost of an emotion he couldn't quite name. He analyzed it, catalogued it as a mission-irrelevant variable, and suppressed it. "Gratitude is an unnecessary expenditure of emotion," his synthesized voice replied. "The logical outcome has been achieved. The system has been corrected. That is all that matters." He brushed past her and walked out of the compound, a silent, green specter disappearing back into the night from which he came, leaving behind a dismantled criminal empire and a group of rescued people who would never know the name of their terrifying, efficient savior. He stood before Doom in the throne room, his armor still bearing the faint scent of pine and cold mountain air. The mission data, downloaded directly from his suit's logs, was displayed on the large holographic screen behind the throne. Doom reviewed it in silence, his helmeted head perfectly still. He analyzed every takedown, every tactical decision, every line of code Izuku had used. The silence stretched, thick with judgment. Finally he spoke. "Flawless." It was a single word, but it was the highest praise Izuku could imagine. "You identified the systemic weakness, gathered intelligence, and executed a plan with surgical precision." Doom elaborated, turning his throne to face him. "You neutralized the threat, liberated the assets, and incurred zero collateral damage. You did not posture. You did not grandstand. You did not seek emotional validation from those you rescued. You were an instrument of pure logical will." Doom stood, descending the dais to stand before his student. He was a mountain of steel and authority. "Today, you did what the so-called heroes could not. You brought order to chaos. You excised the cancer that their flawed system allowed to grow. You saved lives, not for glory or fame, but because it was the logical, correct course of action." He placed a heavy, gauntlet hand on Prodigy's shoulder. The gesture was not one of affection, but of ownership. Of investiture. "You have learned your lessons well, my Prodigy. You are ready for the next stage." Izuku looked up at his master, his own face hidden behind the soulless, black visor. He had saved people. He had stopped villains. He had achieved a heroic outcome, but the young woman's question echoed in his mind. Are you a hero? No, he thought, with a chilling, absolute certainty. He was not a hero. Heroes were flawed, emotional, inefficient. They were part of a broken system. He was a solution. A surgeon for a sick and dying world. And his work was just beginning. The throne room of Castle Doom was a chamber of calculated silence, a place where the fates of nations were weighed on the scales of a singular, indomitable will. Izuku, prodigy, stood at attention before the obsidian dais, his new armor a silent, green and gray shell. The echoes of his first successful mission, the clinical dismantling of the Kava Syndicate, had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of the castle's life support systems. He had proven his competence. He had demonstrated his loyalty to the logic of Doom. Now, he awaited his next directive. Dr. Doom sat upon his iron throne, not in repose, but like a predator coiled to strike. On the immense holographic display behind him, the mission report from the Simkarian border had been replaced by a swirling, three-dimensional map of the globe. Lines of energy, trade routes, and political influence crisscrossed its surface, a complex web that only an intellect like Doom's could fully comprehend. The Syndicate was a symptom prodigy. Doom's voice resonated, each word precise and weighted. A localized infection. Trivial to excise, but the disease, the plague of chaos and incompetence that grips this world, remains. Its heart is not in the shadowed borderlands, but in the sunlit centers of power. His gauntlet finger gestured, and the globe zoomed in with breathtaking speed, bypassing Europe, crossing Asia, and centering on the island nation of Japan. The city of Mizudafu, a place Izuku now felt was a lifetime away, became the focal point. A single, sprawling complex was highlighted in a pulsating, analytical red. Yue High School. This is the epicenter of the hero phenomenon, Doom stated. The primary forge for the next generation of weapons this society will deploy to maintain its flawed status quo. Men and women of immense power are trained not in strategy, not in governance, not in the disciplines that build stable civilizations, but in public relations and reactive violence. They are taught to be symbols, not solutions. Izuku's mind, now a finely tuned analytical engine, processed the implication. You intend a direct assault? A low, rumbling sound, the closest Doom ever came to a chuckle, echoed in the chamber. A sledgehammer for a task that requires a scalpel? I have taught you better. No. A direct assault would merely galvanize them, strengthen their pathetic resolve. To defeat an ideology, you must first understand it from within. You must know its strengths, its followers, and most importantly its secrets. The display shifted again. It now showed a complex energy diagram, a spiraling vortex of brilliant, multifaceted light that seemed to bend space and time around it. It was unlike any quirk energy signature Izuku had ever seen. It was deeper, older, more complex. For months, my orbital sensors have been monitoring a unique energy anomaly, Doom explained. It is not a standard quirk manifestation. Most quirks are a closed loop, a biological expression of a singular, static ability. This is different. It is a cascading singularity of chronal energy. It stores power. It transfers from host to host. It carries the echoes, the imprints, of its previous bearers. It is a legacy, passed down through generations, growing in power with each transfer. Izuku stared at the swirling light, his mind racing. A quirk that could be passed on. A power that accumulated over time? The strategic implications were staggering. It was the ultimate weapon, the ultimate symbol. Our intelligence suggests this anomaly, this one for all, is currently housed within the buffoonish form of All Might. Doom continued, his voice laced with intellectual contempt. And he is now a teacher at Yue High School. He seeks a successor. A new vessel for this power. The mission, in all its terrifying scope, finally crystallized in Izuku's mind. It was not just about reconnaissance. You want me to find this successor? Izuku stated, his voice the calm, synthesized monotone of his helmet. I want you to be a candidate. Doom corrected him, a chilling amendment. But that is a tertiary, long-term objective. Your primary mission is infiltration and intelligence gathering. You will enroll as a student in UA's hero course. You will become one of them. You will learn their methods, analyze their abilities, and assess the psychological profiles of your classmates, the future pillars of this broken system. You will be my eyes and ears inside their most sacred institution. His secondary objective was clear. I am to monitor all might. To study the nature of one for all. To understand its mechanics, its limitations, its potential for capture or replication. Precisely. Doom confirmed. Knowledge is the ultimate power, prodigy. Before we can neutralize this weapon, we must first dissect it. You, with your unparalleled analytical mind, are the perfect instrument for this task. Izuku processed the plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and brilliant. But there was a logistical flaw, a detail from a life he had all but forgotten. There is a complication, Master, he said. The identity of Izuku Midoriya is recorded as quirkless. I would be denied entry, a trivial bureaucratic hurdle. Doom dismissed with a wave of his hand. Reality, my boy, is a matter of paperwork and perception, both of which I control. The display shifted to a forged digital portfolio. Izuku Midoriya's school records, medical files, and personal history had been subtly, expertly altered. You have not been missing, Doom explained, outlining the cover story. Shortly after your disillusionment, you were scouted by the Von Doom International Foundation for Gifted Youth, a reclusive and highly exclusive philanthropic organization. You accepted a full scholarship for private, intensive tutoring at our European campus. You have spent the last 10 months in a specialized program for quirkless individuals, focusing on technological augmentation and strategic theory. The armor you will wear is not the prodigy mantle, but a modular, less conspicuous version officially designated as your support equipment. It is the culmination of your supposed studies. It was perfect. It used the truth as its foundation, a reclusive benefactor, intensive tutoring, reliance on technology, and wrapped it in an impenetrable layer of corporate legitimacy. No one would question the resources of a Von Doom enterprise. You will return to Japan. You will re-enroll in your public school for the final weeks to re-establish your presence. You will take the UA entrance exam. You will pass, Doom commanded, and you will resume the identity of Izuku Midoriya. A flicker of something, a phantom limb of a discarded self, ached within Izuku. To be prodigy was to be powerful, logical, efficient. To be Izuku Midoriya was to be weak, emotional, a failure. He was being asked to wear the skin of the boy he had been surgically excised from his own soul. He analyzed the feeling, catalogued it as identity dissonance, and suppressed it. A name was a tool. A persona was a mask. His mission required this mask. Therefore, he would wear it. I understand, Master. His synthesized voice replied, betraying no hint of the internal conflict. The mission is logical. I will not fail. See that you do not, Doom said, turning back to the global map. The game is afoot, prodigy. And you are my most important piece on the board. Returning to Japan was a profound culture shock. After nearly a year in the stark, disciplined, gray and green austerity of Latveria, Musitaful was a sensory overload. The colors were blindingly bright. The air was thick with the smells of street food and exhaust fumes. The noise was a chaotic symphony of traffic, advertisements, and the cheerful, chattering populace. Izuku, dressed in a simple, dark gray civilian uniform provided by Doom, felt like an alien observer. He walked through the familiar streets of his childhood, but saw them now through a new lens. He saw inefficiency everywhere. He saw the mindless consumerism, the cult of celebrity surrounding heroes whose faces were plastered on every surface, the systemic flaws that allowed for the very poverty and crime that Latveria had eradicated. He kept the hood of his jacket up, his face down. He was a ghost returning to his own haunting ground. His mother, Inko Midoriya, had been informed by a very official, very intimidating representative of the Von Doom Foundation that her son was well, had been engaged in a life-changing educational opportunity, and would be returning. A generous, untraceable stipend had been deposited into her account to ensure her comfort and compliance. Their reunion was difficult. She wept, hugging him so tightly he felt the frailness of her bones. She was overjoyed, relieved, but also confused. The son who had left was a sobbing, broken child. The one who returned was taller, leaner, and possessed a quiet, unnerving stillness. The frantic light in his eyes had been replaced by a calm, analytical intensity that she found hard to meet. He spoke to her kindly, but his words were measured, precise. He was a stranger wearing her son's face. The final weeks at Alderete Junior High were a surreal exercise in social camouflage. He sat in his old desk, a ghost at a feast of mediocrity. The lessons were laughably simplistic. The gossip of his classmates was meaningless noise. He was an adult mind trapped in a child's world. Bakugo's reaction was the most telling. The explosive blonde had stared at him on his first day back as if he'd seen an apparition. He tried to corner him, to intimidate him, to get a rise out of him with the old insults. So, the useless Deku came crawling back. Bakugo had snarled, setting off a series of small pops in his palm. Where the hell have you been? Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't cower. He simply turned to face him, his expression neutral, his posture relaxed but perfectly balanced. He met Bakugo's furious red eyes with his own calm green ones. I was receiving a superior education, Izuku replied, his voice even and devoid of fear. The lack of his usual terror seemed to short-circuit Bakugo's brain. He was prepared for tears, for stammers, for apologies. He was not prepared for calm, objective dismissal. Izuku simply turned and walked away, leaving Bakugo standing there, clenching and unclenching his fists, utterly baffled. The dynamic between them was broken. The predator no longer had power over the prey, because the prey was no longer prey. Finally, the day of the UA entrance exam arrived. He walked to the campus, a sea of hopeful, nervous teenagers flowing around him. He listened to their chatter, their boasts about their powerful quirks, their dreams of fame and glory. They were children, playing at being soldiers. The written portion of the exam was first. Izuku sat at his desk, scanned the paper, and felt a wave of something akin to pity. The questions, ranging from advanced mathematics to literary analysis, were challenging by high school standards. To him, after months of tutelage from Doom, they were elementary. He completed the entire 3-hour exam in 45 minutes, his pen moving in a smooth, silent script. He triple-checked his answers not out of uncertainty, but as a matter of procedural discipline, then sat in perfect stillness for the remainder of the time, his mind already focused on the next phase. Then came the orientation for the practical exam, held in a massive auditorium. The pro-hero present Mike was on stage, a whirlwind of leather, blonde hair, and sonic energy. Information delivery system, inefficient. Izuku's mind analyzed automatically. Relies on excessive volume and performative gestures. Data-to-noise ratio is suboptimal, but effective for engaging a juvenile audience. Present Mike explained the test, a 10-minute mock battle in a massive, simulated urban environment. The opponents were robots, each worth a certain number of points. As he spoke, a tall, well-built boy with dark blue hair and glasses stood up, his hand chopping the air with rigid precision. Excuse me, sir. A question, he boomed. On the printout, there are 4 types of villains listed, yet you have only mentioned 3. If this is a misprint, it is a great shame upon Japan's finest hero academy. He then turned, his sharp gaze falling upon Izuku. And you, with the messy hair. You have been muttering this entire time. It is distracting. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. Izuku fell silent. He hadn't even realized he'd been vocalizing his analysis of the crowd's quirk distribution. He looked at the boy, Tenya Ida, he recalled from his pre-mission briefing files, of the famous Ida hero family. Subject Tenya Ida. Personality profile, rigid, rule-oriented, displays traits of inherited institutional arrogance. A product of the system. Predictable. Easily manipulated through his adherence to protocol. He simply offered a blank look and fell silent. Present Mike clarified that the 4th robot was a 0-point obstacle, a gimmick to be avoided. The crowd buzzed with speculation. Izuku simply processed it as another variable. They were bused to their designated battle centers. Izuku was in Battle Center B. He saw the girl with the brown, bob-cut hair from the orientation. She seemed incredibly nervous. He also saw Bakugo, stretching and sneering with ferocious confidence. As they stood before the massive gates, Izuku began his preparations. While others were stretching or using their quirks to psych themselves up, he subtly touched a control on his wrist. Under his nondescript green and gray tracksuit, the modular components of his support gear hummed to life. Lightweight alloy plates slid into place over his torso, arms, and legs, greaves locked around his shins, and his reinforced gauntlets powered on. It wasn't the full prodigy mantle, but it was enough. The gates began to open. "Go!" Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The other candidates stood frozen for a beat, confused. "What are you waiting for? The test has started. There are no countdowns in a real fight." The mob surged forward. But Izuku did not. He remained at the gate for 3 full seconds. In that time, he launched 3 dragonfly-sized drones from his belt. His vision was instantly flooded with data as the drones spread out, creating a real-time, 3-dimensional map of the battle center, tagging every robot, every potential ambush point, every other student. Then he moved. He didn't charge down the main street. He vaulted onto a nearby rooftop with the aid of his suit's microservos, his movements silent and swift. He ran across the rooftops, a green and gray blur, bypassing the initial scrum where Bakugo was already racking up points with explosive, indiscriminate blasts. "Inefficient," Izuku noted. "High energy expenditure for minimal strategic gain." His HUD highlighted a cluster of 3 one-point robots cornering a student down an alley. Izuku dropped from the roof behind them. They turned, their red optical sensors locking onto him. One lunged. Izuku didn't meet its charge. He slid under its legs, his hands slapping a small, magnetic device onto its inner thigh as he passed. He rose, tapped a command into his gauntlet, and the device emitted a high-frequency pulse that overrode the robot's friend or foe protocols. The robot froze, then spun around and slammed its massive fist into the face of its nearest robotic ally, destroying it. It then charged the third, and the 2 machines began tearing each other apart. Izuku was already gone, leaving a bewildered student standing in the alley. 2 villain points, 0 energy expended from his suit's core. This was his method. He was not a brawler. He was a ghost in the machine. He moved through the city like a surgeon, identifying targets of opportunity. He used targeted EMP blasts to disable entire squads of robots at once. He fired small plasma charges that didn't destroy the robots, but melted their ankle joints, causing them to topple uselessly. He found the central network hub for one sector, hacked it, and sent a third of the robots on a rampage against their own forces. He saw the nervous girl from the orientation, Uraraka Achiko, cornered. She was touching robots, making them float, but she was reaching her limit, looking nauseous. A large 2-pointer was bearing down on her. Izuku landed silently behind her. "Your quirk has a weight limit and induces nausea with overuse," his synthesized voice stated calmly. Uraraka yelped and spun around, her eyes wide. "Tactical recommendation: use your ability on surrounding debris. Create floating projectiles. Less strain, greater area denial." He continued, already raising his gauntlet. A precisely aimed laser beam, no thicker than a pencil, shot out and severed the robot's hydraulic lines in its neck. It seized up and collapsed. He then pointed to a pile of rubble. "Do it." Stunned but desperate, she did as he said, touching several large chunks of concrete. They floated into the air. "Disengage the gravity on my mark," targeting the cluster of 3 advancing units to the east. "Mark." She did, and the concrete chunks crashed down, crushing the robots. "Efficient," he stated before his leg servos propelled him back up to the rooftops, leaving her staring after him, a mixture of gratitude and deep confusion on her face. He had just saved her, but it had felt less like a rescue and more like a field command. In the observation room, the UA faculty was in an uproar. "Who is this kid?" a teacher exclaimed, pointing at a monitor dedicated to Izuku. "His name is Izuku Midoriya. Quirk none. He's registered with support equipment." "Support equipment?" Aizawa's tired voice was sharp with disbelief. "That's military-grade hardware. Look at him. He's not fighting them. He's dissecting them." Nizu, the principal, sat watching with his beady eyes, a slow smile spreading across his muzzle. "He's thinking 3-dimensionally. He's using hacking, environmental manipulation, and look there, he's prioritizing rescue points. On the screen, Izuku was systematically saving other students who had gotten in over their heads. He wasn't doing it with heroic speeches, he was doing it with cold, calculated efficiency, disabling their attackers and moving on without a word. Each rescue added a substantial number of points to his score. All Might stood at the back of the room, his skeletal form rigid, his hands clenched into fists. He felt a profound, chilling dread. This was the boy he had crushed, the boy whose dreams he had dismissed on that rooftop. Now that same boy was here, displaying a level of strategic genius and technological power that was utterly terrifying. There was no joy in his movements, no passion. Only the cold, hard logic of victory. What have I done? Tashinori Yagi thought, a pit of ice forming in his stomach. What path did I set him on? Suddenly, the ground shook. A shadow fell over the entire battle center. The zero-pointer had been released. It was a colossal machine, bigger than the tallest buildings, a green behemoth of pure, mindless destruction. It swatted a skyscraper, and the structure crumbled into dust. Panic erupted. Every student, including Bakugo, turned and ran. It was an obstacle, not an opponent. There was no point in fighting it. Izuku, perched on a rooftop, simply watched its approach. His HUD scrolled with data. Target, Arena Trap 0. Threat level high, collateral, low, direct. Power source, exposed spinal conduit. Structural integrity weak at primary torso joint. Purpose, psychological warfare. Induce panic, a gimmick. He was about to turn and leave, his point total already exceptionally high, when he heard a cry of pain. He looked down and saw her again, Uraraka. She was trapped under a pile of rubble from the building the robot had destroyed, her leg clearly pinned. The robot's massive foot was rising, preparing to take another step that would crush her completely. The other students were running away. No heroes were coming. It was the USJ all over again, but in microcosm. Something ancient and deeply buried flickered inside him. The instinct that had made him rush the sludge villain. Analyze. Suppress. Inefficient emotional response. But his analysis provided a new conclusion. Variable, potential future asset trapped. Objective, rescue points are awarded for altruism in the face of overwhelming odds. Action, a demonstration of superior power is strategically advantageous. Conclusion, intervention is the logical course of action. He didn't scream. He didn't shout a heroic creed. He acted. Engaging zero-pointer, he said, his voice a calm monotone broadcast only to himself. Power core to 100%. Rerouting all available energy to primary weapon systems. Channels of green light on his armor flared to a brilliant intensity. He leaped from the building, but not towards the robot. He landed on the side of an adjacent, 50-story skyscraper and began to run up its sheer face, his boots magnetizing to the surface. In the observation room, everyone gasped. What is he doing? Izuku ran, a vertical sprint against gravity, until he was level with the zero-pointer's head. His HUD painted a glowing red target on the robot's neck, right at the junction between the torso and the head. Calculating trajectory. Firing solution locked. His synthesized voice calmly narrated. He pushed off the building, twisting in midair. He brought both of his gauntlets together, a powerful hum building as their emitters began to glow. Doom Bolt initialized. The name was an unconscious, instinctual homage to his master. A sphere of crackling, blindingly white plasma formed between his palms. He put every ounce of the suit's reactor into the single shot. With a roar that dwarfed even present mix quirk, a massive beam of pure energy erupted from his hands. It was not a chaotic explosion like Bakugo's. It was a focused, sustained lance of destructive power. The beam struck the zero-pointer's neck. There was no explosion. For a moment, there was only an impossibly bright light and the shriek of tortured metal. The robot's head was severed from its body in a single, clean, surgical strike. The colossal machine froze. Its head tumbled from its shoulders, crashing into the street with a deafening boom. The body stood for a moment longer, headless, before it began to topple backward, away from Uraraka, its own immense weight pulling it down. It crashed into the cityscape, its fall shaking the very foundations of the artificial island. Izuku landed in a perfect three-point crouch amidst the settling dust, his armor venting superheated steam. A profound silence fell over the battlefield. The other candidates, who had been fleeing, stopped and stared, their mouths agape, at the boy who had just single-handedly decapitated a monster that was supposed to be unbeatable. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku stood up. The power drain had been immense. His suit was at 3% energy. He walked calmly over to the rubble, his armor groaning with the effort. He placed his hands on the massive slab of concrete pinning Uraraka and, with the last dregs of the suit's amplified strength, lifted it just enough for her to pull her leg free. He then collapsed to one knee, the suit powering down completely. He had won. A week later, the results arrived. Izuku sat in his sterile room in the small, doom-funded apartment he shared with his mother. He opened the holographic projector. All Might appeared in a pre-recorded message, congratulating him. "And now for your results, young Midoriya!" All Might's voice boomed. "You passed the written exam with a perfect score! But let's see how you did on the practical." A scoreboard appeared. First place, Izuku Midoriya. Villain points, 60. Rescue points, 65. Total, 125. He had not just passed. He had shattered the previous record. He had done it not with an innate gift, but with intellect, strategy, and technology. He had done it with the tools of doom. He closed the projector, his face an unreadable mask. There was no joy. No celebration. He simply opened a secure, encrypted channel on a small device. To Sovereign. From Prodigy. Subject, Phase 1 complete. Message, infiltration successful. Yue has accepted me into the hero course. I begin in 1 week. The wolf is in the fold. Long live Latveria. He hit send. The mission had just begun. The first day at Yue High School was supposed to be a culmination, a triumphant arrival at the threshold of a dream. For the other students filing through the massive gates, their crisp new uniforms a badge of honor, the air itself seemed to thrum with nervous excitement and limitless potential. They were the chosen few, the top 1% of applicants, the future heroes of Japan. Their faces were a vibrant mosaic of hope, ambition, and barely contained pride. Izuku Midoriya felt none of it. For him, this was not a destination, it was an insertion point. The hallowed halls of Japan's premier hero academy were not a sanctuary of learning but a hostile environment to be navigated, its inhabitants not peers but targets of observation. He walked through the gates with a calm, measured stride, a stark contrast to the buzzing energy around him. His green and gray support gear, a heavily streamlined and less overtly militaristic version of the prodigy armor, was disassembled and packed into a reinforced, multi-compartment tactical backpack. Yue had approved its use, but the paperwork had been a mountain, scrutinized by their top legal and engineering minds. Doom's corporate facade had held, but Izuku knew he was already under intense observation. He found his classroom, Class 1A. The door was absurdly large, a practical consideration for students with size-altering quirks, but a clear architectural statement of the larger-than-life world he was now entering. He paused for a moment, running a final diagnostic on the persona he was about to inhabit. Izuku Midoriya, quiet, observant, intellectually gifted but socially withdrawn. A product of a reclusive, tech-focused education. Not arrogant, but detached. Not aggressive, but unnervingly competent. The mask had to be perfect. He slid the door open and was greeted by a scene of contained chaos. The boy with the glasses and engine legs, Tenya Ida, was rigidly chastising Katsuki Bakugo for having his feet on the desk. Bakugo, in turn, was sneering, a low, rumbling growl in his chest, radiating an aura of belligerent superiority. "Don't you think that's disrespectful to our upperclassmen and the craftsmen who made these desks?" Ida chopped the air with his hand, a caricature of formal discipline. "Like I care!" Bakugo snarled, a smirk playing on his lips. "What junior high you from, you stuck-up extra?" Izuku's presence went unnoticed for a few seconds. He scanned the room, his mind automatically cataloging the occupants, cross-referencing them with the data he'd collected on the exam participants. A girl with pink skin and horns. A boy with a bird's head. A floating uniform. A diverse collection of genetic anomalies, each a potential threat, each a puzzle to be solved. Then Ida saw him. "It's you!" he boomed, marching over with startling speed. "Good morning! I am Tenya Ida from Soulmate Private Academy, Midoriya," Izuku replied, his voice a quiet neutral. "I know. I read the acceptance list. I must apologize for my behavior at the orientation." Ida bowed a perfect 90 degrees. "I misjudged you. You were the one who discerned the true nature of the practical exam, weren't you? I was completely blindsided." "You are clearly the superior student," Izuku simply blinked. "You perceived a hidden objective. I perceived a scoring variable. The outcome was the same." He offered no warmth, no camaraderie. It was a statement of fact. This detached response seemed to fluster Ida. Before he could recalibrate, a cheerful voice cut in. "Oh, you're here! The plain-looking one!" He turned to see the girl he had rescued during the exam, Uraraka Achiko. Her cheeks were flushed, her brown eyes bright with a genuine, guileless energy that felt alien in Izuku's new world. "You were amazing at the exam. That punch, that blasting, was incredible. And thanks for saving me. I was so nervous I could barely function. My actions were dictated by a logical assessment of risk versus reward," Izuku stated, his voice the carefully modulated monotone of his persona. "The acquisition of rescue points was the optimal strategic path." Uraraka's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She had been expecting a hero in training, someone who would blush and say, "It was nothing." She had not been expecting a walking tactical computer, but her innate good nature persevered. "Oh. Well, whatever the reason, it was super cool. I'm Uraraka Achiko." "I know," Izuku repeated, turning to find his seat. It was then that Bakugo finally registered his presence. The sneering smirk on his face vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief, which quickly curdled into rage. He shot up from his seat, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Deku?" The name was a venomous whisper that cut through the classroom chatter. "What the hell are you doing here?" Every head turned. The tension in the room ratcheted up instantly. Izuku calmly placed his bag beside his designated desk and turned to face his former tormentor. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He simply met Bakugo's furious, crackling gaze with a calm, steady one of his own. "I passed the exam, Bakugo." "The same as you," Izuku said. The use of his family name, not the derogatory Kaken, was a deliberate, calculated severance of their old dynamic. "Passed?" Bakugo stalked towards him, his palms beginning to smoke. "Don't fuck with me. A quirkless, useless piece of trash like you could never pass. You cheated. You must have." The old Izuku would have been trembling, stammering apologies, his body instinctively curling in on itself in a posture of submission. That Izuku was a fossil, buried under layers of logic and reinforced steel. The new Izuku stood his ground, his posture relaxed but perfectly balanced, ready to counter any physical attack. "The exam tested for more than just destructive capability," Izuku replied, his tone clinical. "It rewarded strategy, problem-solving, and altruism. Perhaps your score suffered in those latter categories." The insult was so subtle, so surgical, that it took a moment to land. Bakugo's face went from red to purple. "What did you say to me, you damn nerd?" He raised a hand, small explosions popping in his palm like firecrackers. "If you are all here to make friends, then you can pack up your things and leave." A new voice, tired and utterly devoid of energy, cut through the confrontation. The students turned to the door to see a man lying on the floor in a yellow sleeping bag, looking like a disheveled caterpillar. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," the man said, unzipping himself and standing up. He was tall and thin, with tired, bloodshot eyes and a capture weapon that looked like a tangled scarf wrapped around his neck. "Life is short. You're all too irrational." It was Shota Aizawa. Eraserhead. Izuku's internal database immediately brought up his file. Quirk, erasure. Nullifies emitter and transformation type quirks via line of sight. Weakness, dry eye, line of sight must be maintained. Fighting style relies on capture weapon and brutal, efficient martial arts. Logical to a fault. A significant potential threat. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Pleasure to meet you, he said in a monotone. Now, put these on and meet me on the field. He held up a UA gym uniform. The locker room was a cacophony of nervous energy and adolescent posturing. Izuku changed in a corner, his movements efficient and silent. He ignored the stares and whispers that followed him. He was the enigma, the quirkless kid who had somehow scored first place. He could feel their curiosity, their suspicion. He catalogued it and moved on. On the field, Aizawa looked just as bored as he had in the classroom. We're having a quirk apprehension test, he announced. Murmurs of protest rippled through the class. What about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation? Uraraka asked. If you want to be heroes, you don't have time for pointless ceremonies, Aizawa retorted, his gaze sweeping over them. UA is not a normal school. I have freedom to run my class as I see fit. You've been taking standardized tests your whole lives, but you've never been allowed to use your quirks. It's not rational. The Ministry of Education is run by fossils. He tossed a softball to Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished second in the practical exam. What was your farthest throw in junior high? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa said. Do whatever you need to. Just stay in the circle. Bakugo stepped into the circle, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. He stretched his arm back, and then, with a thunderous roar of "Bii!" he unleashed a massive explosion, propelling the ball into the sky. It soared, a tiny speck against the blue, before finally arcing back down. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excitement. Wow! 705 meters! This looks so fun! Izuku's analysis was different. High-yield, omnidirectional propulsion. Inefficient. A shaped charge would have provided greater thrust with less energy. But the psychological impact is undeniable. Aizawa's tired expression hardened. Fun? You think this is fun? You have 3 years to become a hero. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Idiots. His next words fell like a guillotine. The student who ranks last in total points for these 8 tests will be judged to have no potential and will be expelled immediately. Panic. Pure, unadulterated panic swept through the class. Expulsion on the first day? It was insane. It was unfair. Izuku felt nothing. It was a logical, if harsh, motivational tool. It was a test not just of their abilities, but of their ability to perform under extreme pressure. It was a classic stress induction protocol. Doom would have approved. The tests began. The 50-meter dash. Ida, with his engines, was a blur. Bakugo used his explosions for short, powerful bursts. Izuku, with a quiet command, activated the micro-servos in his leg gear. He didn't use any flashy propulsion systems. He just ran, his augmented limbs eating up the ground, finishing with a time that placed him firmly in the upper middle of the class. It was a carefully calibrated performance, impressive for a quirkless person, but not so superhuman as to draw unwanted scrutiny. Grip strength test. A large boy with multiple arms and another with a rock-like quirk scored incredibly high. Izuku, using the hydraulic assistance in his gauntlets, scored a respectable 110 kilograms, again, carefully within believable limits for advanced support tech. Standing long jump, repeated side steps, seated toe touch. In each event, Izuku performed with unnerving consistency, using his gear to compensate for his baseline human abilities, always landing near the top but never in first place. He was a gray man, blending in. He observed his classmates, his visor-less helmet, part of his approved gear for head protection and data monitoring, feeding a constant stream of analytical data to a hidden recorder. Momo Yayorosa. Quirk, creation. Can create any non-living material from her exposed skin. Limited by her knowledge of the material's molecular structure and her body's lipid reserves. Versatile, resource-dependent. A strategic asset. Shoto Todoroki. Quirk, half cold, half hot. Exclusively uses his right side for ice generation. Psychological block prevents use of his left side. Powerful, but emotionally compromised. A glass cannon with a glaring, exploitable weakness. He was a wolf in the sheep pen, silently assessing the strengths and weaknesses of the flock. Finally, it was the ball throw. Uraraka scored infinity by making her ball weightless. The rest of the students used their quirks to varying degrees of success. Then, it was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling mundane in his gloved hand. He could easily break Bakugo's record. A miniaturized railgun attachment built into his gauntlet could launch the ball into low orbit. But that was not the mission. The mission was to maintain the mask. He took a simple pitcher stance. He had calculated the optimal angle, the perfect amount of augmented strength to use. He was about to throw when a sudden, intense pressure washed over him. He felt a chill, and the soft hum of his suit's power systems died. His hair, which usually floated slightly due to static from his gear, fell limp. "I erased your support equipment." Aizawa's voice was a low growl. His eyes were wide, glowing a faint red, his black hair floating around his head. His capture weapon writhed like living snakes. "A test like this is not rational for someone who would be a liability the moment their toys break," the class gasped. Aizawa had moved without a sound, now standing just a few feet from Izuku. "I saw you during the entrance exam," Aizawa said, his voice low enough that only Izuku could hear. "You have a brilliant mind. Your strategy was flawless, but you also threw it all away in a single, reckless act of self-destruction to take down that zero-pointer. You pushed your equipment past its limits, leaving you powerless and vulnerable, just to save one person. You have the same irrational self-sacrificial streak as another hero I know. The kind of thinking that gets you killed." Izuku stood perfectly still, his mind racing. Aizawa wasn't just testing his physical abilities. He was testing his mindset. He had seen through the cold, logical exterior and glimpsed the ghost of the boy who had charged the sludge villain. This was a direct challenge to his entire philosophy, to Doom's philosophy. "A hero is not someone who makes a grand, single gesture and then dies," Aizawa continued, his red eyes boring into Izuku. "A hero is someone who can save people again and again. You, with your reliance on breakable tools and your willingness to throw your own life away, cannot do that. You have zero potential." The words were almost identical to All Might's. "You can't be a hero." The old wound, which he thought had scarred over, throbbed with a phantom pain. He felt a surge of pure, cold anger, an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in months. It was an anger born not of petulance, but of pure, intellectual offense. This man, this product of a failed system, dared to judge him? Dared to call his calculated risk irrational? He had saved Uraraka not out of reckless abandon, but because his analysis determined it was the optimal course of action. It was a demonstration of power, a psychological blow to his rivals, and a fulfillment of a key scoring metric. It was the most logical move on the board. Aizawa, blinded by his own narrow definition of heroism, couldn't see it. Izuku met Aizawa's glowing red gaze. He did not speak. He let the silence stretch, a battle of wills fought in the space between them. Aizawa was waiting for him to break, to argue, to show fear. Izuku gave him nothing. He simply waited, his expression unreadable. Finally, Aizawa blinked. The glow in his eyes faded, and his hair fell. The power returned to Izuku's suit with a soft hum. "You have your gear back," Aizawa sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Hurry up and throw. You're wasting everyone's time." He turned and walked away. Izuku stood in the circle. The anger was still there, a cold, dense star in his chest. He recalibrated. The mission parameter was to blend in. But Aizawa's challenge demanded a response. A simple, average throw would now be seen as an admission of weakness. He needed to make a statement, but one that was still within the realm of his cover story. He raised his arm. He channeled a precise amount of power to the servos in his shoulder and elbow, not enough to be impossible, but enough to be impressive. He focused not on brute force, but on perfect form, applying the principles of physics he had mastered. Every angle, every rotation of his body was optimized for maximum energy transfer. He threw the ball. It didn't explode off his hand like Bakugo's. It left with a sharp, crisp snap of displaced air. It flew on a perfect, flat trajectory, cutting through the wind with minimal drag. It wasn't a spectacle of raw power, it was a demonstration of absolute precision. Aizawa's device beeped. He held it up. 705.3 meters. The class was silent. He had beaten Bakugo. By 1/10 of a meter. He had done it without explosions, without flash, without a single wasted motion. He had done it with pure, calculated efficiency. It was a direct, silent rebuke to Bakugo's entire philosophy of overwhelming, chaotic force. Bakugo's face was a mask of incandescent fury. Deku! He roared, his body language screaming murder. How did you do that? Tell me how! He lunged, explosions already blasting from his hands. Before he could take 2 steps, he was jerked to a halt, tangled in Aizawa's capture weapon. Stand down! Aizawa's voice was dangerously low. Stop making me use my quirk. It gives me dry eye. Izuku simply turned and walked back to the group, his expression unchanged. He had made his point. The rest of the test concluded. When the final scores were tallied, Izuku Midoriya was ranked 5th. A strong showing, but not strong enough to be the center of attention. Todoroki, Yaoyorozu, and Bakugo ranked above him. Last place was a short, purple-haired boy named Mineta Minoru. By the way, Aizawa said, his face breaking into a wide, unsettling grin. The expulsion was a logical deception. To draw out your full potential, the class erupted in outrage and relief. Yaoyorozu, however, calmly pointed out that of course it was a lie, as it would be irrational to expel a student on the first day. As the students headed back to the locker room, Izuku felt a presence behind him. He turned to see Todoroki, the boy with the ice and fire quirk, watching him. His heterochromatic eyes were sharp and analytical. Your equipment, Todoroki said, his voice a quiet monotone. It's remarkably advanced. The power output required to throw that ball, it's significant. It is a prototype from my sponsor. Izuku replied, feeding him the cover story. I see, Todoroki said, though his eyes suggested he saw more than Izuku was letting on. You beat Bakugo's score by a fraction of a point. That wasn't a coincidence, was it? It was a message. Izuku met his gaze. Here was an intellect. Unlike the brutish Bakugo or the rigid Ida, Todoroki was observing, analyzing. He was a threat of a different kind. It was the optimal result to achieve the desired psychological effect. Izuku answered truthfully, without elaborating. A flicker of something, understanding, perhaps even respect, passed through Todoroki's eyes before he turned and walked away. The day was far from over. As they returned to the classroom, a booming voice echoed from the doorway. I am here! Walking through the door like a normal person, All Might burst into the room in his silver-aged costume, his famous smile a blinding beacon of heroic energy. The class exploded with fanba and fangirl excitement. Izuku watched him, his face a mask of neutrality, but his mind was a whirlwind. He was face to face with the man who had crushed his dream, the man whose power he was here to dissect. All Might's eyes scanned the room, and for a fraction of a second, they locked with Izuku's. The hero's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. He saw the quiet, intense boy from the rooftop, now clad in the uniform of his school, looking back at him not with adoration, but with the cold, assessing gaze of a scientist studying a specimen. Welcome, young heroes, to the most important class at UA High. All Might boomed, recovering his composure. Hero basic training. For today's lesson, we'll be jumping right into this. Combat training. He pressed a button, and numbered cases slid out from the wall. And to go with it, you'll need these. Your very own, pre-approved, custom-designed costumes. The class cheered, rushing to grab their cases. Izuku found his, case number 17. He already knew what was inside. It was not the prodigy armor, but a further iteration of his support gear, designed by Doom to be the perfect blend of function and hero costume aesthetic. As he walked towards the changing rooms, he passed Bakugo, who slammed him against the wall, his face inches from Izuku's. I don't know what kind of trick you're playing, Deku. Bakugo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. But I'm going to find out. And I'm going to enjoy blowing you and your pathetic little toys to pieces. You're nothing but a pebble on my path to becoming number one. Izuku didn't struggle. He simply looked into Bakugo's enraged red eyes. A pebble, Izuku replied, his voice a dead-calm whisper, can be enough to derail a train if placed correctly. You should be more mindful of where you step, Bakugo. He pushed off the wall and walked away, leaving Bakugo trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. The wolf had bared its teeth for the first time, and the alpha of the flock had no idea what kind of predator it was truly dealing with. The first combat trial was about to begin, and Izuku already had 100 different ways to win.